Welcome back. Today we are going to explore our watercolors by trying out all different types of techniques in using watercolors. And today I'm going to go through about 12 specific ones, and I have a couple extra boxes here to experiment as well. So I'm going to walk you through each of the different techniques and then give you some space to explore on your own. For my space, I've got a paper towel, I've got my watercolors, I've got some water, and I've got my paintbrush, and I'm ready to go. All right, so our first technique is going to go in our first box here, and I'm just going to get my brush wet. And our first technique I'm going to show you is something called wet on wet, which means I'm going to get my box here wet first. And now that the paper is wet, I'm going to go in with the color. I'm just going to start from the top and work my way down with color. All right, so let's make sure we can see it on the screen. So now that I am going in with my watercolor, you could see that it really just spreads on its own. This is the wet on wet technique. So if you're at home, a little paper clip or these little clips work just fine to help reduce it. You can also take a rubber band and bring it through, just something to kind of hold it steady, because it will make your paper warp even if you do have a watercolor paper. That's going to happen a little bit. And we'll talk more about paper and warping and how to prep your space. But let's get back to our practice, okay? So we tried our wet on wet technique, and now we are going to go on to wet on dry, which means I am going to paint on a dry piece. Now, if your area is still wet over here, you can always skip a box, and then by the time it dries, just start to fill in. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to skip a box and come over here for my wet on dry. With watercolors, if we get too close, we start to bleed into the other colors. So this paper is dry. I'm not going to get it wet, and now I'm going to go in with my orange and see how that makes a difference. You can see that it's not spreading the same. I have a little bit of control, a little bit more than I did on the other, but it's also not going to spread the same way. All right, so my next one is going to be something called a graded wash, which means I am going to keep the paper dry, but I am going to spread the watercolor while it's still wet. So instead of having it be kind of a flat look like this, wet on dry, I'm going to try to do a little gradation in there. So I'm going to do this one with yellow. All right, so with the color bleed, I'm gonna let colors just blend right into each other. So I'm gonna start with my original color, red, and I fade it out like I did the last one, using water to just kind of spread it thin. But then I'm gonna take orange, and I'm just gonna let that color bleed right in there. I'm gonna add a little bit more water to kind of push the blending over on this side. But you can see that's why you wanna get it a little bit transparent over here. Give it some wetness to work with so it can start to blend. And then I'm just gonna flip this here and bring in the yellow. Now my next box is for glazing. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna set it up in this upper box here by just doing one basic color to start with. So I'm gonna just bring a light red up here. This is going to be my glaze that I come back to once it's dry. So while I'm waiting for my glaze area to dry, I'm gonna go into my other empty box here, and I'm going to do a dry brush on top of that. So that means that I'm gonna take like a thicker brush like this one, and it's a little bit wet, but not really. It's mostly dry. So I like to do this with a thicker brush where I get a lot of these different hairs to make some texture with. And then I'm gonna go into one of my paints that I've already kind of gotten prepared to use. I'm gonna use my orange here. And I'm just gonna dip my brush into it. Here, I'll do that. Dip my brush into it and just kind of do some different techniques with the dry brush. The idea is that you can really work with texture this way. So this next technique is this idea of dabbing your watercolors as you're using them. So I am going to work in this box right here. Got a little bit in the other side. I'm just gonna do a little color blending so it looks real nice here. So we get enough color here. So let's say I'm doing like a landscape and this is a sky that I'm painting, but I didn't leave room for the sun. You can take a paper towel like this and dab into your paint, and if it's still wet, you can start to lift it a little bit. So now it looks like my area up at the top for my glazing has dried, so I can go and add another layer up there. So my red went across, and now I'm going to keep my orange going across, and I'm gonna get it a little bit transparent, and I'm just gonna go across this way. Just a way to show you that you can build up these layers, and they don't need to be really dark. We wanna see through them. Like I said, with watercolor, it's all about the magic of layering, letting the paint go with the flow. Now you all got these watercolor kits at home, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take some of these watercolor pencils that we have. So I am going to do a little gradation. So you can see I didn't press super hard where I can't see the paper anymore, because once I add some water, this is really going to come to life and get much more vibrant. So look at what happens when I add water to the watercolor pencils. Something that you can do, like I don't have pink in this set, so something that you can actually do, which is really interesting, is you can work on another piece of paper, you know, create yourself a little color off on this side, build it up a little bit, and use this. Watch when I add some paint or water to it. And now I can use it. I'm just going to do it right here on this glazing so you could see. All right, so for my next box, I want to try a little bit of a splash technique. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some extra paper that I have and just kind of block out a little bit. I'm going to aim for this area right here. And now I want to show you a little bit of this idea about watercolor resistance. So I'm going to use an oil pastel. I'm going to do a little drawing here with it. I'm going to go over with watercolor. So you could see that the oil pastel, the watercolor resists the oil pastel. This happens because inside of your oil pastels, the pigment is kept together with oil. And if you ever heard the term or the concept that water doesn't mix with oil, right? They separate from each other. So what it's going to do, the water in the watercolor is what's holding that pigment together. So it resists that specific area. So this works with oil pastels, and this works with crayons. Crayons have a wax that then when the watercolor goes on top, it resists it as well. So for my last boxes, I'm going to do a little bit of experimentation, and you can try this at home too if you have these materials, or try some different materials that I don't name on here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try out mixing watercolors with salt and some alcohol, and then plastic wrap. Favorite techniques. I really love it. It makes such a cool design, and you can go in with pen and pull different textures out for some really interesting abstract artwork.